Good morning, everyone. My name is Cynthia Romanowski. I am the fairly new Bibliographic Services Manager. I joined SWAN at the beginning of February 6th for that matter. So today we have a little bit different lineup. So some of the discussions that we had on the previous agenda, I know that we are still working on hashing those out a little bit. So in my little time here that I had, these are just some of the things that I saw as I familiarizing myself with Symphony and with SWAN. So before we get into the agenda, I would like the SWAN staff that is on the calls to go around and introduce them. And Claudia, since I see you first, can you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Claudia Nixon, Bibliographic Services Consultant at SWAN. I think all of you know me and we met at some point, so I'm glad to be here with you guys. Diane, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm here. I'm Diane Nicolau, SWAN Bib Services. Yeah, I think we probably all know each other pretty well. Is Angela?
Angela, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi. I was trying to unmute. I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Puckett, SWAN Bib Services.
Hi, I'm also here, Scott Brandwein, SWAN Assistant Director and Bibliographic Services Manager Emeritus. So it's good to see you all again. But I'll give it back to Cynthia.
Good to see you, Scott.
I think Sam is on the call too.
Not yet. I see Vicky. Vicky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I will. I am Vicki Totten. I am the IT and System Support Consultant, otherwise known as SWAN's Professional Lurker.
I do not see Sam on yet, but we're going to move forward. So one of the first things that we have on the docket for our discussion is the way that we're going to be doing the summary fields. So one of the problems that we've been having in Aspen has been the summaries not being accurate. And when you do a search in Aspen right now, this summary actually comes from our 520, which is great. But when you actually click into the record, this comes from Syndetics. And unfortunately, this is one of the examples that we've been coming across in which we can't fix this summary. And so what we have to do is when it's the wrong summary, we have to open up a ticket with Syndetics, and then we're on their time frame for them to fix it. And in this particular instance, this record is actually fixed. Claudia got notification on March 10th that it was fixed, but as you can see, it still doesn't make it to the Aspen catalog. They said that Syndetics said that it would take some time, but meanwhile, we have this description that is not for this book, Counting for the Birds. So one of the things that we're going to do is that we're going to switch it to where we're using our 520. And that way, when something is incorrect in the record, we can correct it a lot faster than waiting for Syndetics to do it for us. Now, before you guys freak out, this is one of those situations in which if there is a 520 present, it will take our 520. If there is no 520, it will take Syndetics. So we don't have to go back and fix every single record to make sure that it has a 520. It may be something that we do as if we're working on the record, we can certainly add a 520 in it as we go along, but we're not going to move faster and make this a huge cleanup project. When most of the time I would say that Syndetics is pretty good about having the right description. It's just really when those descriptions are wrong, it takes them a few months, not weeks, to fix. So we want to ensure that we have the best information out there for our patrons, and having something that we can have a little more control over, I think is more beneficial to our patrons. And as a cataloger myself, it will not drive me crazy that it's wrong, and I will have the ability to fix it. So I find that very refreshing. So that is why we have it on the docket. I'm not sure, Scott, do we know when they're going to change this over for us?
We will, if we want to go ahead and do it, we'll coordinate it alongside a release. So we have a release coming up, or we can wait a couple of weeks. Those happen frequently enough that it will be within a few weeks.
Okay, great. So, and we'll make sure to communicate that to you all as well. So any thoughts, comments, discussion on the changing of the 520 to our cataloging rather than relying on a third party for descriptions and summaries?
Cynthia, I just have a question. Can you just clarify? I had submitted a ticket on one of these incorrect summaries, and it's still incorrect. And this is going back a few months. And I know Sam had told me you would have to go, that wasn't something we could fix. So Scott, when he just said, when is this happening? Is that when it would automatically change to the correct one? Are we talking?
It should.
So it shouldn't be yet, like we're waiting for it to activate that it will
Yes.
display ours. Okay.
Yes. And if there is one in there, so it has to have one in there as well. So there's two things so ours will be the primary summary. And then when it gets flipped on in Aspen, it should take what's in our BIP records over what Syndetics is.
Okay.
And then we can always go back and see, in your particular instance, we can go back and see and make sure that happens too. So at least then we have a good example to go back and check as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I don't ever speak in 100% terms because I've worked with software and know enough that sometimes what we think should happen doesn't always. So I'm not going to say 100% sure that is exactly what's going to happen. There's always that little teeny tiny thing that programming is not always as simple as we think it is. So that is the plan, that it's going to switch to ours and everything will be good. And we have a little more control over, the incorrect ones, but we're gonna think positive and say it'll fix it. Anything else? Anyone else want to chime in on that? Okay. So moving along to the next one, authority files. So one of the things that we do is we get records from Marchive once a month. And in looking at the authority files that come along with our Marchive stuff, there's a lot of discrepancy, and it kind of throws off indexing and stuff like that when we have multiple headings for the same author, illustrator. So I will give you an example. So here's one of the files that we get. And as you can see, a record came in with Neil Clark as the illustrator, but then Symphony doesn't know what to do with it because it has multiple different records that currently exist within Symphony. So this comes from not using or checking out controlled headings. So I happened to look up this number in Symphony, and when I looked at the actual authority file, I noticed that there was an uncontrolled heading in the record. And one of the things we need to do as cataloging areas is kind of double check that there isn't a controlled heading that exists for these uncontrolled headings. Now, you're not going to find one for every single one, but one of the things is when we do get multiple things, it would be nice to actually try to put it with other headings. So it helps if we do our due diligence and kind of check to see if this is actually a controlled heading, because I have the record up in Symphony, so I will bring that up for you. So in this particular instance, here's the record, and yes, it looks like it's authorized, but it's not the right Neil Clark. And that's why I went from this record, so you can start seeing my rabbit hole here. I went from this record in our workflows. Then from this record, I went to the OCLC record and I saw that it was actually an uncontrolled heading. So just doing a simple search in the authority files for Neil Clark, it gives me a listings, but if you just kind of go through, I already know what the right answer is, but I'm just showing you my process. But if you go through and just kind of look at the different information that is housed in this, you'll see, this isn't about nursing, so it obviously is not that one, but we'll go through, oh, journalism, but this guy is an illustrator. And definitely is not a rugby person. So most likely it's, oh, look, there's one for an illustrator. So most likely this is the correct authority file. And if you do a search for this name, and I won't take you down that rabbit hole again, you do find other information or other records for this particular entry as an authority file for an illustrator for children's books. So in this particular instance, I'll just snag this one because I'm pretty confident it's this person. Dump it in here and actually replace the main record for them. Just because I know that other people may not look for this one. I'll even control it for them. And then I'll take this information and make sure it gets into our record here. And this will also tell me if we don't have this record in as well. So it's not coming up unauthorized. So that means we have other headings or other records in the system, as you all know, that have this name. So that's just one of the things that I've noticed. This is a huge file, and Claudia has been helping me go through them and kind of cleaning up and kind of rectifying these different discrepancies in authority files. Some other fun authority file work that we've been doing as a team has been the lovely cleanup of all of these. So I got to move my screens around. I apologize. this gets in the way. I'm gonna stop sharing for just a second, just so I can move my screens around without causing you guys to get seasick when you have multiple screens open. So one of the things that we've been working on is also some work on some older authority files that we have come across. So I'm going to share my screen again. And it's been coming up as something that happened during the when we migrated to Symphony. So these are just some authority files that for some reason were older, and we just hadn't had a chance to, they come in and they are called provisional. So this is about 1,023 records that have random or just authority files that are in there that are actually not, or they do have records to them, but they shouldn't have records to them. So it's kind of confusing because they're actually not really authority files. So we're not quite sure how they were created, but they came in when there was a migration. So we've been doing some cleanup work for those. I will give you an example of one in here. So let me just move this and I will pull it up. So on this one, so as you can see in this one, she really does have a valid subject heading or authority file, I mean. So it's just really coming through, and I believe the one that we're looking for is Star of Grace. So here's Star of Grace, and it looks like an authority file, but you know, it was just never really rectified as one. It's considered provisional. So we just have to figure out, is it supposed to be there? Is it not supposed to be there? A lot of them, I had one of these was an ISBN for a book. So I don't think that's an authority file. So we're just kind of going through and we're trying to do some cleanup work for these particular records to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to give our patrons and our users the most accurate information behind the scenes. Because it's also beneficial to, when they're searching, that we're giving them access points that are supposed to be there and not linking to bad data. So I'm all about linking to accurate data. Part of what makes me a cataloger, I guess. So that's one of the things that we're working on. And then the next one, well, before I move on to the next topic, is there any thoughts, suggestions, concerns? I know we're going to be working on some authority file documentation to help you all try to find accurate authority files if you're not seeing the controlled heading in OCLC. So we're working on that documentation as a team to make it clear of, you know, how do we do this? Certainly do not want anyone to spend a half hour on trying to find one heading that probably does not exist. Amazing, some of these headings that have been coming in, we've cataloged the record before the heading was even created. So I'm really looking at headings that are already established, and you know, we should be matching them up and doing our due diligence to at least attempt to find the accurate, to control that heading. Some is pretty obvious, like the Illustrator one, and then sometimes it's not. And we're hoping to give you a few areas of where you can look. My favorite thing to do is if I know it's an author, then I try to go to the author's page and see if they've done other materials, other books, and then try to look for them on OCLC as well. Sometimes I just stay in OCLC first and do a search for that author and see what other materials have been found. I was able to rectify an authority file discrepancy simply by doing something like Wizards of Waverly. There was a Heather Anderson with 1 year, and the majority of the Heather Andersons had another year. One was a musician and the other one was actually the author. And for some reason, this book got put under the musician. So in those instances, sometimes it's pretty obvious, but it's not so easy sometimes when you're looking for these newer authors that don't really have an established heading or stuff like that. So we're going to help you out if you do want to do more with authority files to kind of give you some guidance of places that you can look. And again, sometimes you're just not going to find one, and that's okay. One day they might have an authority file and somehow Marchive will probably pick it up and we'll get a new one, just like we're finding for some of the newer DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff like that. Some of these actors are just getting their authority files created. So any thoughts, suggestions on that? Comments? Anyone scared of authority files? Okay. So the next one is more for a discussion. I was always, as a cataloger myself, and I've worked at a few public libraries. I had to do games. I've had to catalog games. I've had to catalog puzzles and kits. And my thinking on the creation of original records and OCLC has always been to create it, the master record at least. And then after I create it, then I start putting all of my local stuff onto it so that I can bring it into my catalog. And I understand that's very time consuming. I understand that it can be, you know, one of the puzzle pieces could go missing and then what? But I'm kind of old school in my cataloging, that I don't just catalog for my institution. Being a part of OCLC, we're kind of cataloging for the world. And so even if my piece goes missing, that piece might still be there for another library that could use that record. I kind of like to think that we're all in it together. So I'm willing to say, you know, I'm willing to open up to discussion, because, you know, it's not just me or my team that's doing this work. It's all of you. And so I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, questions, concerns, that sort of thing. Is it, you know, are you encountering if they take a lot of your time? Are you looking for, you know, is it just you want to just do a local one and don't want anybody else to put your names, put their holdings on it? Like, what are some of the things going on? Anyone?
Hi, it's Colleen from Oak Park. I'll just say we don't have games and puzzles that are just standalone that we would be cataloging. It's always part of a kit that our children's staff has made, and there's random things in there that would not apply to other libraries. You know, maybe we have the puzzle that somebody else has, but it's in this kit with a bunch of other items. So for what we have, I prefer just doing our own local records, and I wouldn't be creating something in OCLC because nobody else would have the exact thing that we're, you know, and if something gets lost, they put something new in there, and it's just always a rotating So for me, we like to just have local ones. I understand if you have something that is just a game that everybody else could have, that certainly makes sense.
And that's really what this is for. Go ahead, Julie.
Oh, I was just gonna say, kind of similar, but not to Colleen, for our local kits that are curated by our selection staff. We just make our own sort of records. But if a game or a puzzle is something that could be purchased from anywhere and we're not doing anything local specific to it, we pull in OCLC records, or I'll make one if there isn't one. So.
There's a comment in the chat.
Can you?
Sure. Erica from Addison Public Library, she shared that they create original records in OCLC for things like games and puzzles if there isn't a record already. For kids, they use local records, similar to what Colleen and Julie, similar to what we do in SWAN. Anyway, welcome Erica to SWAN. It's your first cataloging advisory meeting.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you for sharing. Yes.
And I used to work at Addison years ago, so I've had my hand in those kits years ago. So yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking, is if it's more standalone and whatnot, then definitely move forward, and if you can, do an original record for it in OCLC. If it's something that you're having difficulty with or anything, you can always reach out to the bibliographic services team and work with them at getting the original cataloging done for it as well. I just think that it makes it easier for all of us too, when there is those little idiosyncrasies of games and puzzles, that it is helpful when there isn't a record that exists for it. I always, whenever I did my own kits, I would always look for OCLC, and then I would copy and paste them into an original record for my local catalog. So that was always helpful, because then some of the cataloging was already done for me for that particular puzzle, even though it's part of my kit. So it was always helpful for me, even when I was doing original cataloging just for our own library, that I always found that to be helpful as well. So good. So then there is some documentation that exists on creating your own records for your own local institutions. So please refer to that if that is an area that some of you are going down to, so that we don't have a problem where you have a specialized kit and then someone else sees, oh, I have this kit too, and it's really not the same kit. So that is, we've had some of that going on too. So it is recommended that you follow the local practices, that documentation that we currently have on our SWAN sites. Claudia, can you find that documentation and put it in the chat for everyone, and then they can have it if they want to bookmark it as well?
Sure, I'll do that. I also wanted to say that we are reviewing the support site documentation until April 30th. And at any time, if you go through the documentation and you think something is not very clear, or can you further clarify a certain topic, just let us know, okay? The documentation is a living document. So I'm going to add that link to the chat.
Thank you. And so the next one that we have on there is foreign country records. Now, I know that our current policy has been for being able to use a country of origin. So we're talking about the 040 subfield B, and whenever it is non-English country for a foreign language material. So I'm going to use, if it's a book that was done in Poland, for a Polish book, Swan has been saying that that is okay to use. And if you're going to use one of those records, we are recommending that you at least update the main headings as like the subfield E, if it says translator, put it in English. Make sure that the headings are controlled, and also make sure that the record reads in English, because we're having some problems where we're getting another thing with the authority files we're coming across, that the records are being left in the non-English language. So then they're being seen as different records, and sometimes a book comes along and an English country has cataloged it. So then we're having multiple bibliographic records in the system for the same book. So we just want to be a little clearer in our cataloging processes for to make sure that we're following the recommendations, and that we ensure that we aren't getting duplicates in there. I've even have a record of about, and I will show you all this. One of our team members was kind enough to run a report for me that has all of the foreign language stuff. Unfortunately, these are foreign country records for English books. And so that is not, this is a fun project that I've been going through. So we want to make sure that we are using English ones, and if that we're deriving records for the English to make sure that they are staying as a, 040 subfield B English with for at least English speaking books. And I understand that when you have a book that's all in Polish or Spanish or Arabic or anything, it is easier to use a record from a country if that's the only record and that's the country of origin. I understand, and that's why we have the recommendation. But if you are feeling adventurous and want to do a new derived English record, that would greatly help out your fellow SWAN members and reduce some of the duplication that we're having in the system, and allow us to do grouping better on Aspen if we are all pointing our records to the same record. So there's kind of like a domino effect in this kind of thing. And that's why I'm bringing it up today. It's just to kind of start cleaning up the back end of the data so that we can get the user experience in Aspen a little easier for people to follow. And then we can't, like, the hardest thing for me to hear is always saying that the cataloging is bad cataloging. It's like nails on a chalkboard for me. And they're not saying our cataloging is bad, which is good. But it's still painful to hear if that's ever the case. So part of, you see a theme here in starting from the very first one with the 520, as much as we can do our part in ensuring that the data is as accurate as possible, and being able to have that authority to go through and fix it when it's not, is so beneficial for the patrons that come to the library, for the reference librarians that use the data, for the circulation people that check the items out. I always tell my team, I look at tech services as the heart of the library, because you may not see your heart, but man, when it's not working, you definitely feel the effects of it when it's not working in all parts of your body. And when it is working, you start seeing the effects of a healthy heart. So that's why I'm kind of very much in tune with making sure that our data is as accurate as possible. So that's kind of where these projects are starting to stem from.
Cynthia, can you show an example in workflows where they find that the record is a foreign country record, because not everyone is familiar with that 040 tag.
Okay.
And
Sure.
just to illustrate what you meant, like a foreign country record for an English book, that might be confusing for some
Okay.
people.
Yeah,
Thank
let
you.
me pull it up. The screen. Okay, so I will just pull up. This one is in my thing. Let me just bring it up a little bit. A number. So. So this one is right here. So here's the 040 right here. I know this book originally was done in a German country. So it's a subfield, the 040 subfield B tells me it's German. And then up here is the language in English. So this is one of the records that I've been working on to make sure that we have the English record for this. And then if there isn't an English record, I am doing original cataloging on. Most of these are older records. So thankfully we haven't been really adding on to them. So that's always good. We've had more of where this would be a German record for a German book, and then having, so like this is also another example of, here's a subfield E, and we're not, I don't speak German, so I don't even know what this is a relator term for. So this is where it starts to separate stuff too. So we want to make sure that we have this information in, in English, if this were to be cataloged and this was a German book done by a German country.
And it's also missing subject headings. So like for cataloging libraries, if you are like super busy, you don't have time to create original records, it's totally fine to leave them as pre-cat and go back to it later, or just leave as pre-cat and Swan will catalog for you. Or you can also flesh out the pre-cats a little bit if you don't have time to create a full record. But it's better than like, this is like a false positive. I like saying that, a false positive full record, because it's not really a full record. Not only was cataloged by a foreign country, but it's missing tags. So look at the 300 tag. So this record is a mess. So it's much better to leave as pre-cat than bringing in a record like this.
Yeah, so this was actually a really good example of other things we are encountering and other things that get cleaned up as we do these records. But yeah, so that is what I'm talking about in OCLC. I can pull up this record and you can see, I always find that it's a little clearer in OCLC that I'm just gonna grab it because then it'll show me if there is a lovely record for it that is in English. So thankfully there are other records. So you can see there are some English ones done. So I'll be overlaying that record with the English one as well. And hopefully it will collect on that, but I will show you the German one. And it's a little easier to see, I think, in OCLC than in workflows as well. Any questions, thoughts, anything as we're going through? If you have any, concerns about it, if you're not finding anything, like Claudia said, you can just always go back to it or, reach out to us about it. It's just that we're trying to clean up the data as much as we can, and without trying to figure out what happened. Sometimes we try to figure out what happened when we have multiple records, and then it's like, oh, okay, this record is this record, and this record is a foreign record, and this record is an English record. And sometimes there's another record. I actually had an example where I had 3 different records and they were all the same book, but at one point in time, a new English record was created, and so it had a different OCLC record, and they deemed it the same record, so that record was merged, and so then we had it just gets really confusing. So that was another fun rabbit hole day. And then the last part that is a designated thing is the
Sorry, Cynthia, there is a question about the English records.
Yes.
Do you typically use records that are English language records but cataloged by an agency in Australia, for example?
I do. I have cataloged that. I mean, I don't see why it would be any different. It's really because Australia is an English speaking country, and that is what the 040B is it's an English, like that's the country of, it's also the language that it's in. So it's kind of twofold. I'll show you exactly what the record is, or that thing. It's like the country of origin and all of that fun stuff. Let's see, good old OCLC. So if you go to the OCLC 040 right here, cataloging source, language of the cataloging. So it's really like, I call it the country of origin, but it's really the cataloging, the language of the country that is cataloging it. So I'm definitely not being clear. I know what I mean. So this definitely tells you clearer what I should be saying. But it's the language of the cataloging country is really what it's easier to remember it by. So, you know, a good thing is Austria speaks German, so they would have German there. You know, Australia, they speak English, so that's why they have English there. So that's why in that particular instance, yes, that would be an adequate record to so good question on getting me to clarify what I mean. Anything else? Okay. So the next part is one that I am going to have Miss Claudia take over for me, because as you can see, I have like 5 screens all going, and this one is already confusing. The example that we found was a little confusing and ended up being a really good example. So Claudia, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if you want to take over, go for it.
Okay, let me figure out how to share mine. All right, let me find.
Should be at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, let me find my screens here too. Hold on. All right. Okay, let me know. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
My old workflows. Okay, so you guys received an email from me this week. Let me pull that email that we decided to standardize the 245 tag. Let me open the record here. So for subfield N, we're going to spell out volume, book, or what other term that could be here? Volume and book, part, part usually we put here also, but yeah, it can be part 4. So if it's part 4, for example, then you spell out volume, book, or part. But if it's a number, then you can enter like that or like this. But the reason we decided to standardize, one is that we are following RDA guidance, and let me see what RDA. I put the RDA rule in the email that you all received. So we decided to standardize that because it also displays better. I forgot what was the name of that series. I was just showing the runaways. So as you can see, it displays better, not only in workflows, but also in Aspen. And Aspen does a lot more use of the volume information than our old Enterprise used to do. So yeah, going forward, make sure you spell out the volume or book and subfield N in the 245 tag. And actually, as I was correcting this series, I was confused because there are two different titles with volume 2. So this brought me to a little research work after this meeting. Did anyone have questions when you read that email? Any comments or anything that you want to chime in? Any concerns? All right, so Cynthia, I don't know if you want to add anything to this, but this is all I had for the volume information. You can see like it displays much better.
Actually, Claudia, this is Amy at Woodridge.
Oh, hi.
The issue that I have a lot of times with the number is when the title page does not show the word volume, but on the Verso page, it will show volume. Should we be putting in the volume with the number, or because the title page does not show volume, should the volume be taken out? The word volume.
I would add the word volume just to make it very clear. Yeah, if I see it on the source, I'll add it. But this is also a point for discussion. If anyone prefers or think it's better, oh, let's not add it. But you said you saw it in the title page Verso volume, the word volume.
Yeah, it's usually on the Verso, but on the
Yeah.
actual title page, there is no the word volume. It's just the number.
I would add the word volume.
Okay.
And I would second that, just because the reason why we're doing this is to try to standardize it a little more, because sometimes volume is on the front and then that one issue doesn't have, or that one issue has volume on it because it's on the title page. And then the next issue could be what you're bringing up, Amy, is, oh, they put it on the back of the page. So if we understand how it displays in Aspen and how, as Claudia said, that volumes are being treated by Aspen, the only way that we can help standardize that is if we standardize our cataloging, and then those other entry points could be the 246s. So we would just move, like, you would put volume in the subfield N, and then in a 246, maybe you leave the volume off so that it has that variant title in there and patrons can still find it. But for our main thing, we're going to keep it standardized so that we can help with the sorting and the ability to view these titles and make sure that all of the information is as accurate as possible without having it done 40 different ways, because a different editor or publisher, or actually more so with usually editors that like to change things up for catalogers, that, you know, if they decide one day it's going to be on the front and then the next day it's going to be on the title Verso. So I just want to make sure that we kind of follow the RDA rule, and I believe the rule is 2.3.1.7.1. I think that's the rule.
Yes, yeah, 2.3.1.7 titles of parts, sections, and supplements.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's just to help us out, really. And then it's also to help anybody who's doing cataloging, you all who are cataloging libraries, not to like drive yourselves crazy of, okay, how is this one done? What was it done before? For exactly what you were seeing, Amy, you know, like just to get it consistent. And now you don't have to think about it. It's just going to be spelled out. Just put it on there, put a 246 somewhere that has without it, and move along. And you don't have to think about it. And we just standardize it a little better.
It's a really good point you made, Cynthia, because like sometimes it's published and the volume number is in the back, then it's in the front. So it's really good. If it's on the source, let's put a volume there. Anything else? I guess I am going to stop sharing.
So this last part is just an open discussion. If there's any questions that we haven't discussed, anything that maybe you thought of on previous topics that was discussed today. This is pretty much an open area. I can stop the recording if you all feel comfortable more to have an open discussion without it being recorded. I can do that. If there is,
I have something to add to
Okay.
the local records. If you do decide to create just local records for your puzzles or your kits, make sure to put the library 3-letter code in the 245 tag. So it doesn't create confusion and other libraries start attaching their items to your record, because we found some local records where people were putting the 3-letter code in the 246 tag, and not everybody looks at the 246, unfortunately. So make sure you add your 3-letter library code to the 245 tag.
all right, if there isn't anything else, I am going to stop the recording.